So, Mona Fandey, that name, well, maybe you haven't heard of that name, but if you do, you'd know that before it became synonymous with, pure horror, she actually had this whole other life. Back in the 80s, she really tried to make it as a pop singer. I mean, she had the look, the ambition. She was born Maznah Ismail, but she went by Mona Fandey on stage. She put out a record, an album called Diana. She had the big hair, the flashy outfits, the whole package that was popular at the time. She wanted that spotlight, that fame, that adulation. She wanted to be a star. But it just didn't happen for her. The album, Diana, it didn't really take off. Her music career just kind of fizzled out. It never reached the heights she wanted. And for someone so driven by attention, by wanting to be seen and admired, that must have been a huge blow. It's like, what do you do when your dream just dies right in front of you? Well, Mona Fandey, she didn't just give up on being special. She just changed lanes completely. She pivoted. From failed pop star, she transformed into a Bomoh. Now, for those who don't know, a Bomoh in Malaysia, it's like a traditional shaman or witch doctor, someone who deals in spiritual healing, in magic, in the unseen world. And this wasn't just like a hobby for her. This became her new calling, her new business. And she was good at it. Or at least she was good at making people believe she was good at it. Her reputation, it started to grow. She wasn't just some local fortune teller. People started talking about her, whispering about her powers. She attracted a really diverse clientele too. Not just like regular folks with minor problems. We're talking about people who were looking for big things. They came to her seeking spiritual services related to wealth, to health, to power. And that's the big one, right? Power. People are always desperate for more power. She would offer these elaborate rituals, these charms, these spells. She promised to make people rich, to cure illnesses that doctors couldn't touch, to give them an advantage in their careers, in politics. Basically, if you had a problem that seemed unsolvable in the normal world, Mona presented herself as the person who could fix it using supernatural means. And she built this whole persona around it. She was charismatic, she was convincing, and she knew how to play on people's hopes and fears. Now, Mona wasn't doing all of this alone. She had a partner in crime, or rather a partner in this new spiritual business. Her husband, Mohamad nor Affandi Abdul Rahman. Affandi was integral to her operation. He wasn't just a supportive spouse. He was actively involved in the rituals, in managing the clients, in the whole theatrical presentation of their services. They were a team, a very effective team it seemed, at least for a while. They created this whole world around their Bomoh practice, drawing people in with promises of mystical solutions. And as her reputation grew, as word spread about the powerful Bomoh Mona Fandey, it reached the ears of all sorts of people, including, eventually, a man named Datuk Mazlan Idris. Mazlan Idris was a state assemblyman. He was a politician, and he had ambitions, big ambitions. He wanted to climb the ladder to gain more influence, more power within his party, within the government. But he was also growing increasingly frustrated. Things weren't moving as fast as he wanted. His political career, it felt like it had hit a wall, or at least it wasn't accelerating at the pace he desired. He was looking for an edge, anything that could give him that boost, that push to the next level. So when he started hearing these whispers, these rumors about Mona Fandey, about this Bomoh who could grant immense power, who could change fortunes, he became intrigued. He probably scoffed at it at first. I mean, he was a public figure, a politician. But desperation can make you consider things you never thought she would. He started making discreet inquiries. He didn't want to be seen asking her around about a shaman. That would be bad for his image, right? So he kept it quiet, very secretive. He was careful, but he eventually decided that he needed to seek out Mona Fandey's rumored powerful services. He was willing to explore unconventional paths if it meant achieving his political goals. So this brings us to their first meeting.
It was a highly secretive affair. Mazlan met with Mona and Affandi. We don't know exactly where this first meeting happened, but it was discreet, away from prying eyes. Mazlan, a politician, meeting with a spiritual healer. It had to be kept under wraps. And in this meeting, Mona and Affandi, they went to work. They could read people. They knew what Mazlan wanted, what he was desperate for. They laid out their proposal. They explained that they could help him, but it would require a grand ritual. Not just some small blessing, not a quick charm. This was serious, powerful magic. And the centerpiece of this grand ritual, a potent talisman. They told Mazlan that this talisman, once activated through their powerful ritual, would bestow immense political power upon him. It would clear his path, elevate him, make him unstoppable. They convinced him that this wasn't just some superstition. This was real, tangible magic that would directly impact his political career. They probably talked about how it would influence people, sway opinions, ensure his victories. They played on his deepest desires, his ambition. And Mazlan, desperate for that breakthrough, he bought into it. He believed them. But of course, this kind of power, this kind of grand ritual, it wasn't cheap. Mona and Affandi laid out their financial demands, and they were substantial. We're talking a large sum of cash, not just a few thousand, but a significant amount of money. And on top of that, they also demanded the transfer of property deeds. They wanted land, real estate. This wasn't just like a fee for services. This was like an investment in ultimate power, or so they made it seem. They wanted everything. They wanted to make sure Mazlan was fully committed, fully invested. Or maybe they just wanted to fleece him for everything he had. Mazlan, caught up in the promise of this immense political power, in his desperation to finally achieve his ambitions, he agreed to the terms. It was a huge amount, a massive risk, but he saw it as his only way forward. He handed over initial payments, cash, and he also started the process of transferring property titles to them. He was all in. He was convinced that Mona Fandey held the key to his future, to everything he had ever wanted. With the agreement made and the initial payments secured, Mona and Affandi then set a specific date for the main ritual. This wasn't something that could be done just anywhere, they explained. It needed a special location, a place imbued with the right kind of energy. And that place was Mona Fandey's secluded, unfinished house. An unfinished house. That detail, it's interesting, isn't it? A place that's not quite complete, a place that's off the beaten path, away from curious eyes. That's where the real magic, or what they called magic, was supposed to happen. That's where Mazlan Idris was meant to receive the ultimate power. So, Mazlan Idris, he followed the instructions. He drove out to Ulu Dong, Raub, to that unfinished, isolated house Mona Fandey owned. It was away from everything, tucked back, not a place where neighbors would be watching. Perfect for what they had planned, I guess. He arrived, probably full of hope, thinking this was it. This was his big moment to get that power, that talisman, whatever was Mona had promised him. They brought him inside, into a room that was just set up. It was dimly lit like you'd expect for something mystical. There were all these items around, things that looked like they belonged in some kind of occult ritual, candles, maybe some strange cloths, a mat on the floor, all just for show, of course, to make Mazlan believe this was the real deal. Mona Fandey, she was there, and so was her husband, Mohamad Noor Affandi, and Juraimi Hassan, their assistant. They told Mazlan what to do. They said he needed to prepare himself for the ritual, for the spiritual energy, for receiving the talisman. They told him to lie down on the mat, to close his eyes, to relax, to open himself up to the power. They even made him do some purification rites. They had him completely vulnerable. He was probably focused, eyes closed, maybe meditating, doing whatever they told him to do. He was all in. trusting them completely. He believed this was going to change his life for the better. But it was all a lie. This was the moment. The plan, the one they had worked out, it was ready to go. While Mazlan lay there, eyes closed, completely defenseless, Mohamad Noor Affandi, Mona's husband, he gave the signal. He told Jarami Hassan what to do. Jarami, he was standing behind Mazlan. He took an axe, a big one, and he raised it. And then he brought it down. The axe hit Mazlan Idris in the neck. It was a single fatal blow. It killed him instantly. It was so powerful, so brutal, that it severed his head right off. Mazlan Idris, the assemblyman, the man who wanted power, who wanted to climb the political ladder, he was dead. Just like that. Lying on a mat in a dimly lit room, beheaded by an axe. But they weren't done. This is where it gets truly disturbing. They didn't just kill him. That wasn't enough for them. They had to make sure he could never be identified. They had to make sure there was nothing left to find. So they started dismembering the body. They cut him into pieces, 18 distinct parts. That's what the forensics later found. Think about that for a second. Not just a few cuts, 18 separate pieces. It was meticulous, deliberate. They were trying to erase him. And it gets worse. To further obscure who he was, they partially skinned the body parts. I mean, who does that? That's not just murder. That's an act of pure dehumanization, an attempt to make it impossible to know who this person was. Jarami Hassan, he wasn't just the one who swung the axe. He was right there, helping with all of it. The dismemberment, the cleanup, he was an active participant in this whole gruesome process. Once they had cut Mazlan's body into these 18 pieces and partially skinned him, they needed to hide them permanently. So within that same house, in a storeroom, they dug a shallow pit. They put all of the dismembered remains into that pit, every single piece. And then, to make absolutely sure no one would ever find him, they poured concrete over the burial site. They just sealed him in, like he was never there, like he could just disappear without a trace. It was a calculated, cold-blooded effort to remove any evidence, to make sure Mazlan Idris was gone forever. After all of that, after the murder, the dismemberment, the skinning, the burial under concrete, Mona Fandey and Mohamad Noor Affandi, they didn't waste any time. There was no hesitation, no remorse. They immediately started planning how they were going to spend Mazlan's money, planning what they were going to do with his assets. They had already gotten initial payments from him, and he had started transferring property titles, so they had access to a lot of his wealth, and they were ready to use it lavishly. That was the whole point, right? Financial gain. That's what it all came down to. They also made sure to get rid of the murder weapon, that axe, and any other tools they used during the dismemberment. They disposed of them away from the house, away from the crime scene. They were trying to cover every single track to make sure there was nothing left behind that could connect them to what they had done. And Mona Fandey herself, I mean, her composure in all of this, it was chilling. There was no sign of guilt, no sign of fear, no sign of regret. She was just calm, focused on the next steps, focused on the money. It's really hard to wrap your hand around that kind of mindset, that complete lack of empathy after such a horrific act. It's just disturbing. So Mazlan Idris, being a state assemblyman, a public figure, his disappearance wasn't something that could just fly under the radar. Not for long anyway. His family, naturally, they started getting worried pretty quickly when they couldn't reach him. He wasn't showing up for appointments. He wasn't returning calls. And then his political colleagues, they also started to notice he was missing from important meetings, from his usual routine. At first, it was just concern. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he was taking a break. But as the days stretched into a week, maybe even a little more,
That concern turned into serious alarm. This wasn't him. He was a man with responsibilities, with a public profile. He couldn't just disappear. So his family, along with his political office, they officially reported him missing to the police. And the police, they started their investigations right away. They interviewed family members, staff, colleagues. They looked into his financial dealings, his last known movements. But honestly, they just hit brick walls. There were no immediate clues, no witnesses who saw anything suspicious. It was like he had just disappeared into thin air. There was nothing, just empty leads, dead ends.
Now, while the police were doing their official thing, trying to piece together where Mazlan could be, rumors started to circulate, especially within political circles, which, can be pretty tight-knit. People were talking. Whispers started about Mazlan's interest in spiritual healers, about how he was seeking out shamans for, political guidance, for good luck, for ways to boost his career. And this wasn't exactly a secret to some people close to him. It was a known thing, his belief in these kinds of practices. So when he went missing, some people started to connect those dots, wondering if his spiritual pursuits had somehow played a role in his vanishing. But it was just talk, right? Just speculation at that point, nothing concrete for the police to go on. And then, out of nowhere, completely unrelated to Mazlan's disappearance, something happened that would blow the whole case wide open. Juraimi Hassan, he was Mona Fandey's assistant, the one who was always with them, helping out with the rituals and everything. Well, Juraimi gets arrested, but not for anything to do with Mazlan. He was arrested on drug charges. Just possession, I think. A pretty minor thing, honestly, in the grand scheme of things. So the police bring him in for questioning about the drugs. And, you can imagine he's probably already a bit stressed, maybe a little paranoid because of the drugs. But during this questioning, the officers start to notice something really off about him. He was agitated. He was distressed, way more than you'd expect for just a simple drug possession charge. He was twitchy. He was nervous. His answers were kind of all over the place. And this is where things get really, really weird. Juraimi, in his agitated state, he starts talking. And he starts talking about things that have nothing to do with drugs. He starts talking about Mazlan Idris. And he starts acting like he thinks the police are arresting him for Mazlan's murder. He mistakenly believed that's why they had him. The police were just trying to figure out where he got his drugs, but he thought they knew about the other thing, the big thing. So he's just spilling. He's confessing right there in the middle of a drug interrogation. Juraimi Hassan makes this shocking, completely unexpected confession to his role in Datuk Mazlan Idris's murder. Can you imagine being those police officers? They're sitting there just going through the motions on a drug bust, and suddenly this guy is confessing to a high-profile murder that they have absolutely no leads on. It must have been completely surreal. And it wasn't just him. He didn't just take all the blame. No. He immediately implicated Mona Fandey and her husband, Mohamad Affandi Abdurrahman. He named them. He told the police that they were the masterminds, that they were the ones who planned it, who orchestrated the whole thing. He laid it all out. So obviously at this point, the police drop everything related to the drug charges. This is way bigger, way, way bigger. They've got a murder confession, a high-profile victim, and 2 more suspects. So they immediately start to get the full story from Juraimi. And he tells them everything, including where they put the body. Juraimi then leads the police to this remote, unfinished house. It was located in Kampung Lata Jurum in Ulu Dong, Pahang. It was kind of out in the middle of nowhere, not a place you just stumble upon. An isolated, incomplete building, perfect for hiding something. Or someone. The police, they secure the property immediately. They set up a perimeter, and Juraimi takes them straight to a specific storeroom in the house. He points to a spot on the floor. He tells them, it's under here. Now, Mazlan's body, they had buried it under a concrete slab. So this was not going to be a quick, easy job. The police had to start this really difficult, laborious process of breaking through the concrete. They brought in tools. They started chipping away, slowly, carefully. Every strike of the hammer, every piece of concrete that came up, it just built this incredible tension. They knew what they were looking for. They knew what was supposed to be under there. And the smell as they got deeper, I mean, it must have been just horrific. The smell of decomposition, trapped under concrete for days, maybe weeks. And then finally, after what must have felt like an eternity, they broke through. And that's when they made the horrifying discovery. Underneath that concrete slab, they found the dismembered remains of Datuk Mazlan Idris. His body had been cut into 18 parts, and even more disturbingly, it had been partially skinned. It was a ghastly, gruesome sight, something out of a horror movie, honestly.
As soon as they confirmed what they had found, forensic teams were immediately dispatched to the scene. This became a full-blown crime scene investigation. They had to be meticulous. Every single piece of evidence needed to be collected, documented, preserved. They carefully excavated the entire area, sifting through the dirt and concrete, looking for anything that could tell them more about what happened, about the tools used, about the sequence of events. And, of course, they had to formally identify the remains, which they did. They used dental records. They cross-referenced with personal effects that were found at the scene or that they knew belonged to Mazlan, and it was confirmed. It was him, Datuk Mazlan Idris, the missing assemblyman. News of this gruesome discovery, it just spread like wildfire. It hit the media and it captivated the entire nation. A state assemblyman brutally murdered, dismembered, buried under concrete, all at the hands of a pop star turned shaman and her husband. It was just unbelievable. The public interest intensified like crazy. Everyone wanted to know every detail. It was a story that just gripped Malaysia, and it was only just beginning. All right, that's thought it would be helpful to just chip this in. I hardly get to sit and record a full story at a go. You know what I mean? I guess not. Anyways, I noticed my tone changes as I take breaks. Hope you don't mind. Let's get back to it. So, with Datuk Mazlan Idris's remains finally identified, the next critical step was the autopsy. They had to understand exactly what happened, how he died. Forensic pathologists, they got right to work. And what they found, it was just horrifying. They confirmed what everyone already suspected. Mazlan had been killed by an axe. It was a brutal blow, a single powerful strike that had, it had severed his head. Completely. They didn't just stop there, though. They meticulously examined every single bone fragment, every part of the remains. They were looking for any other injuries, any signs of struggle, anything that could tell them more about the moments leading up to his death. And they found these distinct tool marks on the bones. These weren't just random cuts. They were specific patterns. These marks, they were consistent with an axe, but also perhaps other tools used for dismemberment. This was crucial because it meant they could potentially link specific weapons found later directly to the crime. They also collected soil samples from the remains, hoping to match them to the crime scene, to maybe even specific areas within that unfinished house. The crime scene investigators were just working non-stop. They had to map out every single inch of that place. It was an active construction site, but it was also a murder scene. They were looking for everything: blood spatter patterns, any signs of a struggle where the body might have been moved, and they found it. Despite attempts to clean up, there were blood stains. Not just a little bit, but significant amounts.
indicating where the initial attack happened. They identified areas where it looked like someone had tried to clean up, tried to conceal the mess. But you can't really clean up something like that, not completely. They found evidence of concealment efforts, places where things had been covered or moved, all pointing to a deliberate attempt to hide what had happened there. Now, while all this forensic work was happening, another part of the investigation was kicking off. This was the financial side of things. Police started looking into Mazlan's bank accounts, and this is where things started to get really, really suspicious. They found these large withdrawals, not just one or two, but significant amounts of money taken out of his accounts. And the timing, it was immediately after his disappearance. Right away. This wasn't just a coincidence. This screamed motive. So investigators started tracking those transactions, and they also started talking to people, witnesses. And what they heard, it just built this picture of Mona Fandey and her husband, Mohamad Affandi, suddenly living this completely different lifestyle. They were known to be somewhat flashy, but this was on another level. People were telling police about their sudden and extravagant spending spree, like it was just out of nowhere. Evidence started pouring in. They were buying all sorts of expensive luxury items, new cars, multiple new cars, fancy jewelry, designer clothing. They were just flaunting this new wealth. It was conspicuous, right? You don't just suddenly come into that kind of money overnight, especially when you're supposed to be a struggling pop star or a shaman. This just did not add up at all with their known financial situation before Mazlan disappeared. But here's the thing that really cemented the financial motive. Investigators uncovered this agreement. Datuk Mazlan Idris, he had agreed to provide 10 land titles. 10! As a guarantee to Mona Fandey or Affandi. This wasn't just about a few thousand ringgit for a talisman. This was about serious assets, serious money. Mazlan was putting up a huge part of his wealth, his property, as collateral. It just seemed like he was getting deeply, deeply entangled in their schemes.
So the police had the body, they had the cause of death, they had the financial motive, and they had Jeremy Hassan's confession. Now they needed to tie it all together with physical evidence. Search warrants were executed at various properties associated with Mona and Affandi. And this is where they started finding even more incriminating stuff. At one of their properties, they found what looked like an altar with various deities, all part of their shamanistic practices. But they also found weapons. And here's the kicker. They found Mazlan's pistol, his personal firearm. This was huge. It placed Mazlan's belongings directly in their possession. It was just another piece of the puzzle that was falling into place. And through all of this, Jeremy Hassan's statements were just crucial. He was the one who led them to the body, right? And his account of the murder, the dismemberment, the burial, it was incredibly detailed. And the amazing thing was, as the physical evidence came in, as the financial evidence was uncovered, everything Jeremy said, it just kept getting corroborated. It all matched up. The tool marks on the bones matched the kind of axe he described. The blood spatter patterns matched his description of the attack. The financial transactions matched the motive he laid out. It was just all coming together. His confession wasn't just a story, it was a blueprint for the crime. So, with all the evidence in hand, with the timeline reconstructed, with everything pointing directly to Mona and Affandi, the police issued warrants for their arrest, warrants for murder. It was time to bring them in. Mona Fandey and Mohamad Affandi Abdul Rahman were apprehended. And the way they reacted, it was just chilling. You'd expect some kind of panic, some fear, some denial, but they displayed this unsettling calm, this almost serene denial. Mona especially, she was just completely composed. It was like she wasn't even bothered by the fact that she was being arrested for murder. It was just bizarre. And so it happened.
All three suspects, Mona Affandi, Mohamad Affandi Abdul Rahman, and Jeremy Hassan, they were formally charged with the murder of Datuk Mazlan Idris. The case, which had already gripped the nation, was now moving into the next phase. The public was watching, waiting to see how this unbelievable story, this pop star turned shaman killer, would unfold in court. So, September 12th, 1994, that's when it all started. The murder trial for Mona Affandi, Mohamad Affandi Abdul Rahman, and Jeremy Hassan officially began. And, the whole country was watching. This wasn't just a regular court case. This was like a national spectacle. The media, they were everywhere, every single day. Headlines about the Bomoh killer case. People were just completely fascinated by it, and honestly, a little horrified. The prosecution, they had a strong case right from the start. They meticulously laid out all of the evidence. First up were the forensic reports, and these reports were they were brutal. They detailed Datuk Mazlan's body, how it had been dismembered into 18 pieces. They talked about the axe wounds, the partial skinning. It was all just really gruesome stuff, but it was crucial for showing exactly what had happened to Mazlan. Then came the really big moment, Jeremy Hassan taking the stand. He was a key prosecution witness, and when he spoke, he recounted the whole horrifying story. He told the court everything, how Mazlan had been killed during that ritual. He described how Mona and Affandi were involved, implicating them directly in the murder. It was like a full confession, but from a witness perspective, detailing their roles. He laid out the sequence of events, basically confirming the police reconstructed timeline of the murder. He talked about the blindfold, the quote-unquote cleansing ritual, and then the axe. It was just chilling to hear. The prosecution also brought in financial experts. They presented evidence showing just how much money and how many property deeds had been transferred from Mazlan to Mona and Affandi. It was a substantial amount, enough to really clearly establish a financial motive. And then, to really hammer that point home, they called witnesses who testified about Mona and Affandi's sudden spending spree. Immediately after Mazlan disappeared, they started flashing cash, buying expensive cars, going on lavish shopping trips. It was just a huge contrast to their previous financial situation. And it screamed, we just got a lot of money really fast.
Now, throughout all of this, Mona Affandi's behavior was just bizarre. Truly unsettling. She was notoriously cheerful during the entire trial. She'd often be smiling, even posing for the cameras in the courtroom. And her outfits? She dressed lavishly, wore expensive clothes, even heavy makeup. It was like she was attending a party, not a murder trial where she was the accused. It just did not seem like someone who's facing the death penalty. She just seemed completely unfazed, almost enjoying the attention. It was a stark contrast to the gravity of the accusations against her. But the defense, they had to try to poke holes in the prosecution's case. And they went after Jeremy Hassan hard. They challenged his credibility, pointing out his drug use and his low intelligence. They argued that his statement, his confession, should not even be allowed as evidence. They tried to say he was easily manipulated, that he might have been coerced into saying what he did. This became a really big point of contention, especially in later appeals. The defense tried to cast doubt on everything he said because his testimony was so central to the prosecution's case. For Mona Affandi specifically, her defense attorneys tried to distance her from the actual physical act of murder. They tried to portray her as just a spiritual consultant, someone who was performing rituals, but not someone who physically harmed Mazlan. It was an attempt to paint her as less culpable, to say she wasn't the one swinging the axe. But the prosecution, they were ready for that. They effectively countered those arguments. They emphasized the conspiracy aspect. They argued that even if Mona didn't physically wield the axe, she was absolutely instrumental in the planning. She was the one who lured Mazlan there. She was the one who set up the ritual. She had a clear financial motive, and her role in the whole scheme was
undeniable. They argued that a murder is still a murder, whether you hold the weapon or you plan the whole thing. It was a joint enterprise, they said, and Mona was at the heart of it. So the trial went on for a while with all these testimonies, all this evidence being presented. Eventually, it came down to the closing arguments. Both the prosecution and the defense summarized their cases, trying to convince the judge one last time. The prosecution reiterated the overwhelming evidence: the body, Jeremy's testimony, the financial motive, the sudden wealth. The defense, they tried to highlight the inconsistencies, the doubts about Jeremy and Mona's alleged lesser rule. Then it was up to the judge. He had to review all the evidence, all the testimonies presented during the trial. He had to weigh everything, consider all the arguments from both sides. It was a really complex case with so many layers, from the spiritual elements to the brutal reality of the murder. And then it happened. On February 9th, 1995, the court delivered its verdict. All three accused, Mona Fandey, Mohamad Affandi, Abdul Rahman, and Jeremy Hassan, they were found guilty of murder. It was a unanimous decision. The evidence, despite the defense's attempts to create doubt, it was just too compelling. And with that guilty verdict came the mandatory sentence for murder in Malaysia: death by hanging. The judge passed the death sentence on all three of them: Mona Fandey, Mohamad Affandi, Abdul Rahman, and Jeremy Hassan. All were condemned. Now, here's where things get really chilling. After the sentence was passed, Mona Fandey said something that just completely shocked everyone in the courtroom and, honestly, the entire nation. She famously declared, "I am happy with the decision, and I thank Malaysians." Can you believe that? She said she was happy with being sentenced to death. It was just another layer to her already bizarre and unsettling demeanor throughout the entire process. It was like she was, almost defiant or just completely disconnected from reality. It left everyone just absolutely stunned. Well, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. Just subscribe to my channel and let me be your storyteller from now onwards. You feel me?